Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Richard Morco, and this is the Long Hill Report. And today we have as special guests, experts in their field. Sometimes outstanding in their field, but anyway.
Sometimes standing out in the field.
And he's going to hop to it right now, and that's an inside joke too. It's Jon Cook and Suzanne LePage. They are the owners of Homefield Kitchen and Brewery, and Jon wrote the book, Beer Terrain, From Field to Glass, and he is an expert on that topic of beer.
Especially the drinking part.
No, he is that. We won't deny that. But he does quite know how to make a great pint. So, right now, they have time to be with us because we're all under house arrest, sort of. Anyway, we'd like them to talk about how they fell in love with beer.
Well, I never liked beer, but because, growing up, you don't have a lot of money, you drink all this cheap beer, or your friends do, and somebody gave me a Bass, and I was probably mid-20s, and I thought, this tastes delicious. Now, this is good beer. A few years after that, I learned how to brew beer. We were living with some friends in Worcester, so we did a lot of home brewing. My friend taught me, I taught him, and we just kind of brewed all through our 20s, through having a couple kids. And yeah, I think we've been making beer since 1996.
Yep. Now, did your beer experience seem some of
Yeah, it was from her because I moved in and our roommate brewed beer. I didn't like beer at all, and until I started drinking his, and then it was so good that I was encouraged to stop drinking all his beer and make my own. So.
Why would that happen?
turns out it's still my main motivation.
Well, okay, and he does. And he also, in brewing it, in his book, he writes about how we actually can make, or we can raise, every ingredient for our beer in New England, and that wasn't always so. So if you'd like to tell us how that happened.
Well, it was so in the very beginning in the 16 and 1700s. This was a renowned region for hop growing, and everybody grew wheat and barley. So it was very much a local farm sourced product for a long time until it started migrating westward, especially the hops. But upstate New York had more open tracts, and then Prohibition came and shut down the demand for locally sourced beer. So they, and then when Prohibition was lifted, agricultural technology had developed so that they needed huge, expansive tracts of land, and they found that out west, and perfect climate, irrigation instead of depending on rainfall, things like that. So hops moved away, and small farms started growing more hay instead of grains because grains were also from the Midwest. So just the way the market developed, it disappeared for almost 100 years.
And so what was the impetus to restart that?
The proliferation of little breweries, I think, and trying to do something to sort of, differentiate themselves from the mass market. And farmers saw that there was this opportunity, and so the hops sort of started separately from the grains. And the grains have kind of they've surged, and then they've gone back. And so now most of the grains that we can use when we call local, they come from upstate New York or Maine. The Massachusetts grains were focused in the Pioneer Valley, but there's difficulty with things like combines, these really expensive giant machines.
Right.
I mean, they're not as big in New England. They do make them smaller size, but they're still very difficult to get from farm to farm, and the weather has to be perfect for harvesting, and if you wait a day too long and it rains, there goes your barley crop, and now it's animal food. So that's essentially, the risks were very, very difficult in Central Mass. So now we get most of our grain from Maine at this point.
When they were doing it in Massachusetts, were they doing it along the Connecticut River?
Yeah, yeah.
Which-
Yeah, it was Hadley was a big town for that. The malt house that really proliferated all the malt is Valley Malt. They're located in Hadley, and the owners there they held these conferences, and people from all over the world came and learned how to make malt with locally grown or regionally grown supplies. Because I think there's 2 or 3 conglomerates that own all the major commercial commoditized malt in the world. So these little guys were sort of able to get in and walk in and shake somebody's hand and say, hey, I've got a product and it costs more, but craft beer was obviously booming, and so there was a market for it.
Well, I know that the beer is much better now. I mean, everybody knows that. A friend of mine was just before, maybe a month before the lockdown all started, he said, we're in a golden age of beer right now. And it was true, and we'd say, hey, we gotta go to Europe, we gotta go to all the places and stuff. And life has been ruined since then. But you were mentioning, just as an aside, the colonial era of when the Pilgrims landed. You've heard of the Indian Squanto?
Yeah.
The first thing he said to the English was, welcome Englishmen. Do you know what the second thing he said?
No.
And this is true. Do you have any beer? That is true. But he had been, I guess, kidnapped to England.
Yeah.
And then he got home by some,
He immediately asked the Europeans for their best contribution in all of history, which was beer.
Right. And true.
Yeah.
That's true. So you eventually started Homefield Kitchen and Brewery. Now, I remember when you worked, at the West Brookfield Farmers Market, and you were shelling. Was it shelling the processing the hops?
Oh no, hops! They grow on a vine, so you just got to pluck them off. But it's tedious. And
it looked a little
by hand.
It's
a chore. I mean,
I'm saying, this guy's.
Nobody does that. I always discourage people from growing hops in their backyard unless they're really crazy and they just want to brew themselves 1 or 2 batches a year. But it's difficult to preserve hops. There's volatile oils give them the great flavors. So the big farm in Massachusetts that grows them is 4 Star Farms in Northfield. And they're right on the Connecticut River. And they bought some small-scale machinery from Germany. And they are trained electrical engineers, so they developed a drying and storage process and nitrogen flushed Mylar bags, and they make pellets, and so they do a fantastic job, really top-notch hops. But it's not necessarily something that, I've never wanted to buy them from my neighbors because it's just the labor intensity and the potential for
Is there?
And you've
quality loss.
Yeah, you got to pick them at just the right time
Yeah.
too. So if
Once you harvest them, you got to use them in 24 hours, or they just taste like grass.
Well, that's why squash is one of my favorite vegetables. You can leave it out there for a while.
Right, low maintenance.
Yeah. But is there anybody still just in the general area growing the hops and marketing them?
Yeah, just 4 Star Farms is the big one I know about. I think that there's a brewery in Rhode Island that was growing them for themselves. They were using all their own, and there are probably some farm breweries that dabble in it. But again, it's you're better off if you really want to produce something that's marketable or usable. You probably grow fruit or something like that. Get a lot more bang for your effort.
Well, I mean, the 4-star is the machine you said they bought from Germany.
Yeah.
Does that shock them? Or not? Shock it may not be the right word.
Yeah, it's a harvester, and they take the vines, and the hooks are on a circular conveyor, and it basically drags the vines through a rake, and it just strips them, and then so that part, you could probably, if you were mechanically inclined, you could build a small scale model of this harvester, and that would be a big step, but then you'd still have to face the perfect drying, and you'd have to measure the humidity of the hops, and then the compression into pellets, and then the nitrogen flushing, and then the sealing, and then all the storage space and time. And even then, even nitrogen flushed and mylar packaged and stored at the perfect temperature, in a year, they're not going to be they continue to diminish. The oils are just so volatile. So
other than all that, it's a piece of cake.
yeah, it's hops growing is well, that's probably part of the reason it went away, is because it became industrialized,
Yeah.
and it saved on all the labor. I mean, even harvesting the grains, plus they need the perfect weather. They both need dry weather for harvesting. You harvest either your malting grains or your hops after it rains. If it's not completely dried out, you're most likely going to have a mold infection. And
Well, it's like that with hay.
Yes, yeah, it's similar.
Now, one thing in the book I found kind of interesting was yeast. You found a place that made it in Massachusetts.
Yeah, yeah,
Is
they're
that-
out of business now. So that was Mystic Brewing, and he was harvesting wild yeast, and he was making some marvelous beers. He was a biochemist who had a corporate job fermenting grass clippings, because it turns out a lot of natural flavors come from a scientist in a lab pulling out molecules for fermented grass clippings. And you can get flavors of orange and all kinds of crazy flavors from that process. So he had a good background in that, and he was harvesting wild yeast and brewing beer with all local ingredients and all local yeast. And it was very, very good. But it wasn't, there was not a wild market for it.
So you have to go astray to get your yeast? How far afield? How far afield?
Well, I mean, most of my yeast now comes from Omega Yeast Company in Chicago. And I have used local harvested yeast, but this yeast, I mean, basically, once it's in-house, it becomes indigenous to the brewery. So to me, and one of the things that it really plays so well with the local malt and hops that I use, so the results are amazing. But they found this yeast in farmhouses in Finland. Yeah.
Finns, I see Finns as being hard liquor people more than.
Well, this yeast is pretty remarkable. The flavor is great, and it ferments, unlike English yeasts or German yeasts, it ferments in a temperature range that is just makes my life so much easier in a small brewery where I don't have the industrial capacities of other places where they can do perfect temperature control, and a lot of breweries even have their own labs, and so this is a very low maintenance yeast, so it's nice.
That's good. That's make life easier.
Yeah.
That's what we want. So you got into Homefield. Did you? That was just the logical progression from making. I remember you were selling it to the people at the farm. Not selling it at the farmers market. I don't know, but we all and and it was all legal and above board. But
You were sampling.
yeah, beer sampling, right? And so you just had to do it. Was that the feeling? 'Cause,
Yeah, I mean, actually, when the book came out, I was, in a friendly way, somewhat pressured into doing it. I mean, I was doing book signings at bars and breweries, and people were drinking beer and getting excited, and we'd talk for a while, and total strangers were probably drinking more than they, enough to impair their judgment. There were many offers for people to pull out their checkbooks, and fund my brewery on the spot. Of course, I turned all that money down because I didn't even know their names. But eventually, it persisted, and to get the conversation off my back, I just said, "Give me $50, and when I brew beer, I'll call you, and you can come get your beer."
Yeah, so it was set up very much like a CSA, and we did this with Rapscallion Brewing.
Yeah.
And very like-minded folks that own that place,
Yeah.
and they were just really willing to give it a try and say, all right, we'll brew a batch of all local ingredients. We're not going to do this all the time. There's consistency questions, there's supply questions. Might not be a fit for us, but sure, if you buy the ingredients, you collect money up front from the customers, $50 a piece. They get so many drink tickets out of it. We'll brew the beer and we'll see what happens. And it sold out in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And so we did it again, and it sold out very quickly again. And then by the time we were getting ready for a third one, they said, "You guys should probably get your own place." They were just hitting their busy season. They didn't have the tank space, and clearly there was a niche. There was clearly a demand for the beer with 100% local. People were very supportive, and so we started that process. And that was a year-plus long process to find a place, get the licensing, et cetera. So.
Now, the brewery itself and the kitchen is at 3 Arnold Road, which if you know Sturbridge and you're coming from Charlton, you go along Route 20 and you'll see on the left Kiteson and then the right Arnold Road. And instead of going all the way up to Rapscallion, just after you turn right, you'd take a left into a driveway or a little up into a parking lot, and downstairs was Homefield Kitchen and Brewery.
Our sign's down at the moment. We're closed for a couple weeks because we're actually going to put some tables outside and put a new sign. So it'll be highly visible, hopefully, a couple weeks from now.
Are you going to be putting the tables upstairs? That's good.
Yep,
What do I know?
There's a front patio area that the landlord has been working on, and so
Okay,
the town seems pretty enthusiastic about keeping people outside, so that works for us.
Well, I've seen a few studies that, because I'm investigating this all the time, that says people outside are not transmitting the
No,
virus.
in countries that have done contact tracing, they've only found one outbreak from outdoor infection. So it's, the sunshine, the wind, and thankfully the season's coming, so.
And the word al fresco has always appealed to me.
Yes.
So we just only talked about the beer, and I can't wait for that. But I also can't wait for the food. How did we get into the food? And I have to do a full disclosure. My daughter, Briege, is one of the people that worked there preparing that food passionately. So how did you decide? Because it's a revelation to me today that you were brewing first. I didn't know that because I've only seen him brew.
I taught her how to cook. She taught me how to brew.
It's true, I was a terrible cook when we met.
Now she does the cooking and I do the brewing.
Well, the term transition is big these days, I guess, and so we're all transitional in a way.
Yes.
But how did you evolve into doing a kitchen there?
Well, we knew if we're serving beer, we should serve some food. Probably even required it anyway.
Yeah.
Like, every brewery's got a pretzel machine, or maybe there's like bags of chips, and there's some nominal food. Some breweries, food trucks have been popular. But we just decided if we're going to do this local thing, let's really keep it local, and we'll just do there's a couple great dairies around. Let's just do some nice cheeses, a nice cheese board, cheese and fruit, just little nibbles. So we did that, and then it was like, well, geez, we got all this great cheese. Let's get some, some nice bakeries around. Let's make some grilled cheeses. So we bought this little, what you'd get in your own kitchen at home, grill, and started making grilled cheeses. And then winter came, and it was like, well, we had been doing, salads and things with all these great local products, all this local produce that's abundant in July and August and September. And then, winter's coming, and it's like, well, if we're going to keep this going, we're going to have hot foods. So let's get a crock pot. We'll do soups. And then that turned into another, and next thing you know, we were basically taking a basket of harvest every week and transforming that into multiple meals. And really that form of, the first time I ever was a CSA member myself, having that transition from, when you first sort of learn how to run a household, you make your shopping list and you kind of do some meal planning, and then you go shopping and you buy the stuff, and then you get the CSA and it's like, what am I going to do with kohlrabi? And so now the food starts to plan the menu. And so we just took that mentality, and more people kept eating, and so we had to make more food, and thankfully Breege came along, and she is extremely passionate, and we call her the flavor master. She
And she broke our cheap equipment, which forced us to buy the real stuff. It was a good thing.
Real stuff, yeah.
We had to get
we
real
have
equipment
stuff
for her to
now.
use.
Yep, well deserved. So it just grew from there, and then of course when we were forced to close the dining room, we said, well, ironically, we had been thinking about going in a takeout route. So all winter long we were thinking, and he was getting geared up to do takeout. I was supposed to be gone for 2 months, studying abroad with some students for my other job, and he was going to try to build another revenue stream with takeout, looking at packaging that's 100% biodegradable, and trying to figure out the mechanics of that. What would it look like? What are our big hits that would make sense for takeout? And then all of a sudden we're forced to close, and that's all we could do. So that's what we did, and we just stayed open, did takeout for six weeks. And then kind of got to the point where we're like, okay, we know how to do this. Change is coming. There's going to be a reopening of some kind. We don't know what that's going to look like. Let's close a couple weeks and really regroup and think about what makes sense for us and how can we best open when it's time to open again. Again, sort of almost ironically, but parallel, the landlord was making all these improvements to the building. Our upstairs tenant moved out. He took the opportunity to clean up the front area. It was an antique shop, so it was littered with a lot of old funky things. So when that was gone, he looked at it and he said, oh, this bush has to go, and I'm going to do this. And he loves building with rocks, so he's making a new wall. Next thing you know, he's building a patio, and lo and behold, now we're looking at outdoor seating might be our only option.
At least for a while, anyway.
The rest of the year,
until it
most
starts
likely.
getting cold and rainy.
Yeah. Well, that's encouraging. Do we? You have probably unfair to push you on this, but do you have a time frame? What are you thinking?
We'll be open around the first weekend in June, I think.
Well, that'd be great.
But what we need to do, one of the main things we really need to accomplish is securing our supplies. We've been buying from local farms for our entire adult lives, essentially, and for this business, we've been buying from these farms for more than 4 years, and we were doing takeout and we were struggling to find supplies. So all of a sudden tomatoes had to come from Vermont. All of a sudden there was no beef. So fortunately we have a great seafood supplier in Boston, so we were doing that, but it was just, holy cow, maybe we need to get on the same page and secure our supplies before we plan a menu and try to, be in business every week. So it was a startling thing that happened. I'm really glad that the farms had a big uptick in business, and I hope that lasts. I hope people stick with it because then these farms can grow and our future can be more sustainable and we'll be a more resilient community.
The limiting piece in our food chain really is the processing. We talked about it with the hops and the barley, and it's really the same for our food. Especially in meat, we suddenly saw this like, whoa, the freezer's not full anymore, where it used to be. We'd go see, Joan at Walker Farm, New Braintree, or Julie over at Red River Farm in West Brookfield, and it was like, what do you have? We have everything, and big cuts, small cuts, ground, not ground, and then all of a sudden, all the neighbors started supporting them, which is fantastic. But there's a waiting line for when food can get processed. There's only a few USDA certified food processing meat plants in New England. This issue with crossing state lines has become an issue in the last month or so. Joan especially works with one of the only sustainable and humane
certified
meat processing, so there's backups there. So I have been in touch with our state legislators about starting to think about this, because there's great work being done on those processing facilities could use some support to expand.
Right.
And I'm also in touch with Jen Boudry. She ran for a number of years this Sustainable Communities and Campuses conference every spring. And so she's trying to do some Zoom workshops and keep people talking about all these issues of sustainability across the state. So I've initiated a discussion with her to have this conversation with producers and processors about what do we see post-COVID-19 for our Massachusetts food supply and our food network, the growers, the processors, right down to the eaters, and how do we work on a regional basis with New England. So there's a lot of process and system questions that really are intriguing to me, coming from also an academic standpoint and looking at community development. And then when you walk into that little farm store and you open the fridge and there's not much left there, it all ties together. I always used to think I had one life as an academic, teacher, professional, planner, et cetera, and then this other life is sort of a farmer, brewer, and in the last year or two they really have come together. And
So the local farms like Red River, I see them on social media. They're really thinking they're ramping up, I take it.
Yeah, I mean, they've got a huge waiting list. We were buying multiple, I don't know how many birds a week for years, like I said, and then all of a sudden it was a month wait for chicken. So part of that is, they got to buy the chicks and raise them up. So that takes a little time. Chickens grow pretty quickly, but it's still, and then there's the timing for the abattoirs. So it's not, ramping up can be done, and it should be done, and we really need these farms to thrive and grow. So hopefully they're all ramping up right now.
Well, that's actually my personal feeling is that it's almost nothing good about the COVID-19. But if we got more local animals raised here,
Yeah.
I can use the old English term saying it's an ill wind that blows no good. So at least there is that. How fast it will come on, well, let's hope.
well, and we're entering, as you know, in New England, maybe we're going to get some asparagus soon. Shortly after that, we've got rhubarb, maybe some strawberries. But once mid-June hits, we are flush with produce. And our farmers to them, quarantine they were packed away in their greenhouses getting ready anyway, thankfully. And we've also been working with Lauren at Farmer at Your Door.
Yeah.
Her business has almost doubled in a couple months. She offers food delivery services, working with all these local farms, from everything from meat to produce to prepared foods.
Right.
And so we see that sort of direct, that ability. It's one thing for a farmer to sell direct to consumer, but it's a lot of work, at the farmer's market. It's a lot of work to get set up for a market day.
Oh, yeah.
The CSA model offers sort of the pre-sale, but it kind of creates this a little tension in what you're growing, because maybe some things grow well at your farm, some things don't, and so you always kind of want a nice variety basket, at the end of the week for your shareholders. But the reality is sometimes you just have a bumper crop tomato year. So what we've always tried to do with our farmers is, what do you have extra? What do you have at the end of the market day? You have a lot of tomatoes? Well, I will freeze those and make meatball grinders all winter long. And so trying to...
And I have to say, your meatball grind is very good.
Yeah, it's amazing, actually. I gained 10 pounds the first 3 weeks we were doing takeout.
But trying to position ourselves to be part of the waste management situation. So if local families are going to support our local farms, whatever's left over shouldn't go to the compost pile. And so getting set up to process that, freeze it for those lean months in January where, a bite of broccoli would be delicious. But if you didn't put it in the freezer, then it's, you know, it's coming from a very long way away.
Yeah, so we need to expand the harvest, we need to preserve the harvest, and then on the animal side, we need more processing. You know, essentially the way the problem in the processing is that it's FDA regulated, USDA regulated, and it's essentially, this is the same problem we're having on the small scale in New England. Well, it's a different problem, but it's for the same reason. It's the same reason that the large plants are being shut down. It's because essentially the regulation is designed to be, you know, highly mechanized and just essentially it's kind of written by the big guys so that they can make it super efficient and profitable and keep prices down, which makes it very difficult on the small scale because, you know, you're not going to get the price benefits of the factory farming.
Why is one not surprised?
Yeah.
Well, it's been a very fast half hour, and I'm very grateful to you for coming in. Homefield Kitchen and Brewery, June, 3 Arnold Street. You can go there, you can sit outdoors and enjoy life.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Sunshine.
Suzanne and Jonathan. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.